Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm at an undisclosed location tonight. So, we're going to have a fun time tonight. We're going to talk about geographic profiling. I have a great guest for you. But before we want to get started, I just wanted to thank Forrest Nelson, who continues to help this channel out by gifting subscriptions. So, Forrest, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And tonight we're going to talk about geographical profiling, what it is, what it does. If you have questions about geographical profiling, just try to use QQQ in the chat, and I could try to get a hold of them. I'll be looking at the chat and seeing what's going on. And just remind you, tomorrow at 1 p.m., we have Josh Zeman returning back to the channel. We're going to discuss the latest in the Long Island serial killer case and what he sees for the future. So without any further ado, we're going to be bringing in Douglas MacGregor. Welcome back to the show, Doug. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Joe. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, it's tough when we had you did some great job with with the Rachel Morin case, and it was good to see you on here and Matt McMahon. So it was nice to have that, and Matt's actually in the chat. So we wanted to welcome Matt into the chat tonight. And so I wanted to, a lot of people ask me like they want to hear more about what this geographic profiling is, and I had promised I would try to bring you back, and you said yes. So thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's get into the basics, right? So many people, including myself, were unfamiliar with exactly what geographical profiling is. Could you just explain to the audience, bite-sized pieces, what we get out of what it really does and how it can be used?
Yeah, of course. And there's some, there's reasons why it's not more widely known, and we can get into some of that too. Geographic profiling is basically I look at the geographic, environmental, spatial, and temporal elements of human behavior. What it really is it's in every case I work, I apply the intelligence cycle. So it's basically the intelligence cycle with a behavioral element.
Gotcha. So, there's different things about the spatial, right? Time and place and all the other different aspects of it. When you are either asked by a family member or you decide that you're going to take a deep dive into something and see if you can help out, what are some of the things that you initially start out with?
I need to know everything about the case. If I'm working with a family, let's talk about a missing person. I need to know everything about that person. I need to create a geographic profile of that individual. And when I'm working cases, I'm often creating multiple profiles. So I'm creating a geographic profile for each individual, for each victim, each missing person, the offender, and then it spreads out from there. I'm creating a profile for their families, their acquaintances, and so on and so forth. So I need as much information as possible. And I mean, there's always information that obviously families, even law enforcement, they don't know that I require or that that it would help me. So it takes a lot of digging and questions on my part to get that information out of them. And then it takes it takes quite a bit of open source intelligence gathering on my end as well to get the stuff that I need.
What is something that you must have? Like, without it, it becomes real problem.
Yeah, everything relative to space and time. I mean, that's really what I'm looking at here. You look at, you ask kind of what is geographic profiling before, and I kind of gave the overview of it. But, it's a combination of, open source intelligence, geospatial intelligence, applying GIS and mapping techniques, using social media intelligence gathering, geomatics. It's all these different fields brought in together. And then after that, you're applying the behavioral aspects of it. And you're also looking at, in every case I work, I'm consulting other experts in biology or experts in physics or geology, for example, or other profilers. I'm talking to the profilers that specialize in, your traditional offender criminal profiling. So when, in any case I work, those are the two big things I'm looking for is anything relative to space and time. And that can be all the locations that an individual was at. It can be their routes traveled, their anchor points, I got to get in their minds, get to know their activity and their awareness space, their safe environments, their their places are comfortable. Place versus space is kind of place is more personal and space is more abstract. Their routes traveled, and I need to know the places they don't go. They're just as important. Um, and in helping with all that, any digital evidence that can be provided to me, cell phone records are huge these days, and anything else that law enforcement or family has been able to get a hold of with all our devices we wear these days, from AirPods to Apple Watches. All this information can help me narrow everything down to the second, right? So, for like, an Apple Watch, it doesn't read your heartbeat per se. It reads blood flow in the wrist. But if you can get that data, you can see when someone's heart rate increases or decreases at a certain point in time. Same with the motion on the Apple Watch, right? The motion on the Apple Watch is the motion in the arm. So you can see if someone's fighting back and at what point in time they're fighting back and where that might have occurred. So all these, any data I can get is important, and any information, and it's important to talk to everybody close to an individual to get this information, because you really need to talk to the people closest to them to get the information that is that's required.
Right, so there's a lot of digital evidence, like you said, these days. I call this thing the snitch on your wrist, right? This thing here has so much information, and it's even, can help in some other aspects of the investigation itself. I actually heard a little bit about that kind in that Karen Reed trial, where they were talking about, the activity on the watch and where this person was, and everything else that goes along with it. John O'Keefe being the victim in that case. But we know how that ended, and we're going to see if that case goes back as a retrial, and we'll see if that evidence comes in there. But a lot of people don't really, I don't think, understand the amount of information that we give out on a daily basis, whether it's from your phone or your watch, or now they're coming out with a ring, right? There's going to be a ring that's attached to it. It's not coming out. Actually, some are already out, right? But and how that data is used, and how investigators can help find missing persons, or in some cases, serial cases, right? Patterns and stuff like that. So some of the background on this, right? So we'll get a little. We're going to have a lot of quiz questions out of this, so guys. So make sure you're paying attention, because I give a quiz every day. There's a quiz on this, so there's a couple of different things on here. So there's one theory, right? This kind of ties into a lot, and that's the routine activities theory, right? Felton and Cohen wrote this many years ago, and there's basically three things that you need, right, in order to go through this. So you have the likely offender, right? The person who's going to do it. Suitable target, and an absence of a capable guardian, right? Those are the three main parts of it. How does that play into, how does that theory start playing into you as a geographic profiler?
I'm always looking at routine activity theory. Every case I work, was there a routine activity there? Because, it can change everything about the case and who you're looking at as the possible offender. Just as a quick example, most children that are abducted, they're abducted on their way to and from school, or teenagers, maybe to and from a job, but it's always to and from a location, usually school, or if they're old enough, maybe work. And there's an obvious reason why, because, they leave at the same time every day. They're going to the same location. They're taking the same route, and they're coming home at the same day. It's very, very predictable. So anyone that's targeting children, it's just, they figure out that routine activity, the timing, the travel, and it's fairly easy for them to target those children in that way. So just one great suggestion for children going to school that walk to school specifically, or bike to school. Obviously, kids that take the bus aren't as susceptible to it, but have three different routes you take and mix it up. Don't be predictable. So that's just an example of routine activity. But in any case, obviously, I helped Matt with Rachel Morin's case and routine activity. You want to, if somebody's in a situation like that, you want to understand how routine her jog was. Was it every day at 5 o'clock? Because that makes a big difference from every day at a random time, right? It just makes it easier to target. And then the more routine something is, the more you're looking at somebody who knows that victim or knows that person, and not necessarily personally, but knows who they are, their routines, and is able to use that to target that person. It could be somebody that lives nearby, somebody that works nearby, somebody that jogs at the same time. So you always want to find out how routine somebody's activity was, and that really helps you kind of identify, who the offender may have been or what kind of trouble they may have fallen into.
Right. So, like, as I was doing research for our show tonight, I always try to do this with all my guests, especially when I don't know a lot about the subject, right? So I'm learning just as much as the audience is. So I found that they said that basically the first time this was used here in the United States was in the Hillside Strangler case out in Los Angeles, right? So how do they, so what do they remember? They didn't have any of the digital evidence back then. So what were they doing back then, kind of thing? Let's not, we don't have to talk about Hillside Strangler per se, but going back in the 70s and 80s, what were you doing before all this electronic evidence?
Boots on the ground, right? Boots on the ground. You guys were out there doing your thing, interviewing, and doing, the traditional police work, which is what solves most cases. It's the best thing you can do out there. Every geographic profiling, along with a long list of everything from deception detection, statement analysis, traditional offender profiling, you name it. All these fields are just investigative support. That's all we are, right? And we're supporting people like yourself that's out there, boots on the ground, doing the interviews, collecting the evidence, and putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. We're just here to support you. So back then, it just depends what was available to you back then. Early stages of DNA, you may have had some profiling starting up, maybe some statement analysis, but it was pretty rough for you guys at one point. And it's nice that, as time goes on, you just get more and more support available to you, both in the digital era, but also on the investigative side as well. So, yeah, but I did see one question here, and someone said, rather than take your maybe 3 routes for your child isn't doable, have them travel with a friend. Absolutely. Or have them put an Apple AirTag on them, whatever it is, something to keep your kids safe going to and from school. There it is. But it's a great comment. But yeah, so, back then it was just less investigative techniques, so less support, I suppose.
Right. So I mean, so when I was doing this for a living, right? This was I retired in 2012. So we didn't have a lot of the DNA. The DNA we had already, but not as still what we could do with it today. And the digital evidence was just really kicking in. But the cases that we were dealing with in cold case were from the 80s and 90s, and not much of that stuff on there. So I used to do things. Didn't know exactly what it was called, but we would say like where the person was abducted or where they were killed, right? Where the bodies were left. And then we, try to determine if there was any companion cases. Is that basically what this is all about, kind of thing?
Of course, it's just a great understanding these days. There's a little bit of a geographic profiler in everybody, as there is a profiler in everybody. We all have, we can all look at people and make judgments about those people, right or wrong. We make deductions about people. Yourself and other investigators, detectives out there working these cases, you had all these tools, right? So you were looking at places the victims were found, places the victims were taken from, all these things that you just mentioned. And that is geographic profiling. You were doing it back then. You just really didn't know what it was, and it wasn't a specialty per se. And I work with a lot of people that are great at geographic profiling. They just don't know it. Some of the best people are search and rescue, right? Search and rescue. And they all know that the good ones, they all know lost person behavior, Bob Kester, like the back of their hand. And that is geographic profiling for lost persons. I don't work lost persons. I work missing persons. There's quite a distinction there. But working with search and rescue, you really see that skill set, and it's fantastic to see. And then I work with them to train them in areas they're not familiar with, like evidence locating, doing searches for evidence and human remains and stuff like that. But yeah, all these tools existed. It's just kind of bringing them together. And, it's no different than, little bits of DNA testing existed back then, and some, and whether it's statement analysis or handwriting analysis existed back then. You look for these little things in people's writing or in people's statements, but now there's specialties and people that specialize in this that can bring this as, as a one field to support the investigations.
Holly has a question for you. It says, question for Douglas. Do you see a correlation between geography and seasons of the year?
Absolutely. But it depends on where the case is, right? Because some geographic locations, the seasons are very distinct, such as where I am here in Ottawa, in Canada. We have minus 30 Celsius in the winter, and we have today outside it's plus 30 Celsius in the summer. So sorry if I don't translate that into Fahrenheit for you.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It sounds cold.
Yeah, in the winter it's very cold. But it absolutely matters, right? Because you want to look at, and this goes back to, this is all, it's just human behavior, right? We are less likely to go outside in the winter in the freezing cold, right? That's just who we are. We're less likely to travel further outside on foot in the cold than we are in the summer. So for example, if somebody's been abducted and in the middle of the winter and the person took them away on foot, they probably didn't go as far as they would in the summer. They probably live close by because they don't want to walk 30 in a minus 30 degrees or in pouring rain to get this victim to where they want to take them, right? So I know temperature, weather, geography, seasons, everything that matters. And that goes into the environmental aspect, element of human behavior. And that's critical in every case I work. What's the environment? What's the geography? And that encompasses seasons, weather. Yeah.
Right, and how much vegetation there is, right? That could be part of it.
Of course.
And listen, like you said, I'm assuming the human behavior aspect of it, as you're explaining it to us, meaning like if it's too difficult for the person to do it because of the weather or the snow, they're not going to be able to do it. So they're going to have to look for an easier spot in order to relieve themselves of whatever crime that they're committed and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. We're all lazy. You can call it the laziness principle. It's more technically called the least effort principle, but humans are inherently lazy, and we love convenience. Hence the boom of shopping at home, drive-throughs, right? We love convenience just more and more and more. I have it easier than, and I always see this debate, there's always questions every now and then, like, is offender criminal profiling, investigative psychology, whatever you want to call it, is it real science or not? I mean, it's not science. That's just how it is. And what I do isn't all science either. But a lot of it is based in research and science, and then they draw out of that using experience and other things. And they make deductions from that. But I have it easier than they do because it's very hard for a lot of profilers when it comes to certain cases because they have a very small example to draw from, right? They might have a case that has something that has only been seen, there's only 5 times on record, right? So they're looking at those 5 cases and they're trying to figure out what this offender is like and who they may be and where they are. And that's very, very difficult. For myself, it's a lot easier. I don't tell everybody this, but I have the entire human population, right? I'm looking at spatial behavior from the entire human population, and I have everybody to look at, and I have studies from everywhere. It doesn't have to be forensic or crime related. I'm just looking at how people interact in space and time. And, if I take anybody in this chat and I kind of go through your life for maybe 10 minutes, I can probably map out 90% of your life. It's not that hard, right? It's really not. So I have the advantage there when it comes to geographic profiling.
So there's a question from Stormy, but before we get to that question, as you were doing it, I wrote down a note because I didn't want to forget it. When you were talking about all this data and stuff like that, specifically from the police perspective, electronic case management becomes a real positive thing, right? So if you can get all those old cases into electronic case management, so it's searchable, and that would greatly help. Correct?
That would help, absolutely, and it's so tough. I mean, I know there's VICAP and the same thing, VICLASS here in Canada, and it's one, having law enforcement put all the information in there. Two, having them know to put the information in there and that the case requires that information to be in there. And then what information do they put in, and what do they not put in, right? So it's not easy, right? You get some, I mean, there's lots of, every agency does their best, but you get a rural sheriff's office and they've seen one murder in the past however long, how do they know what to put in there without assistance? So and some of them do a great job. Some of that information is lacking, but like you said, it's ideal if that information is there to draw from. But even more important is just, and you kind of, hit the nail on the head there, is just the case management and digitizing the cases. I'm working 3 cases right now, and I'm just waiting for the case files because they're all being digitized for me right now, so they can be sent to me. So one, digitizing the case information, especially obviously if it's unsolved, and two is filtering that case information and going through it and organizing it. And I know you've seen this, but sometimes I get a case file that's absolutely massive and it's 50 pages of repetitive interviews, right? Because somebody's looked at the case and they've interviewed everybody and then they've closed it. And then a year later, a new detective looks at the case and interviews everybody and then closes it. So it's all handwritten, it's all repetitive, it's not organized, and it's tough. And, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody by any means. I mean, that's just how it goes. But having somebody at an agency that can look through these cold cases, organize them, digitize them, upload it to these databases if required. I mean, that type of person is invaluable. And I work with one lady that does that for law enforcement, and she's absolutely brilliant. And she's got a memory like I've never seen in my life. But having that kind of person is great.
And the technology is there to do it, so it's not
is.
like it was. I mean, when I first, right before I left, we were starting to digitize some of the old cases. So basically, we would just digitize the ones that we were currently working on. But there are thousands and thousands of cases that we had that were open. I mean, it would have been a Herculean task to try to get them all on there. But Stormy has a question. Would you be able to explain? You had mentioned before the difference between the lost person, and the missing person.
Of course,
You said they were different.
They are different. Somebody who's lost, and generally when I deal with lost persons, it's persons who have someone who's lost is not intentionally lost. They went they went missing, or they got lost out of a circumstances not under their control. We'll put it that way. And it's not nefarious, right? It's not malicious. Okay. So like a lost person is a hiker who got turned around in the forest, right? That's a lost person. Right. And you kind of got to make this judgment call. It's not black or white, right? You kind of got to decide, is this a lost person? And I do this with cases. If it's a lost person in the wilderness, I refer to search and rescue. That's their specialty. Let them go out, let them apply lost person behavior and search for this person. There's no point in wasting their time. So that's a lost person. A missing person is somebody who goes missing and, not under their own accord, right? Something's happened to this person and out of their power, and they've gone missing. So it could be, I mean, we all know what missing persons cases are like, but it could be, mental health has caused this person to go missing. It could be, malicious activity. Someone's done something, kidnapped, abducted this person. It could be a runaway. They went missing intentionally. Okay, that's a missing person. They're not lost, right? A child, like in the question here, a child gets lost. A child can get lost anywhere, right? And that's a lost person. A child can get lost in a subdivision, but I mean, you can't grasp at straws and say, well, you really got to look at the age of the person as well and their mental capacity. You or I, we're not going to get lost as easily as a 4-year-old, right? We can navigate our way around the town, the city, wherever we are. It's going to take quite a bit more for you and I to get lost, hence the wilderness, than it is going to be for a 4-year-old. So you really got to kind of look at the scenario case by case and decide, is this person lost or are they missing? And then you approach it in the appropriate way. And I have looked for lost kids in urban areas before, and there's ways to do that. But usually when it comes to the wilderness and someone's lost, I defer to search and rescue.
Mama B's got a question for me, and I think she actually said earlier, she's a fellow Canadian also, says, how does one decide to become a profiler? So tell us your story.
My story. Okay, well, my story is 2 or 3-fold. I kind of had a personal journey and an academic journey. So my academic journey, and it's actually similar to Dr. Vronsky's here, which is kind of funny. I mean, we're both Canadian, obviously, but his background his academic background is in international relations, and so is mine. He went further. He went PhD. I did my master's, but my master's is in defense and strategic studies. Before that, I did a bachelor's in international relations, and then I also did another master's in counterterrorism strategies. While doing my master's in defense and strategic studies, we had a guest from I believe it was the FBI at the time. He came in because I remember the only place I wasn't allowed to go was Langley. Our class did a field trip there, and I wasn't allowed to go. I wasn't allowed to go in CIA headquarters because I was Canadian. But so he came in and spoke to our class, and he spoke to our class specifically on profiling terrorism, profiling terrorists. And that's where it just clicked for me that I wanted to go the behavioral route. I had always loved geopolitics, geostrategy, geospatial aspect of everything, and everything I specialized in my master's was related to that. It was, focusing on missile defense installations. At the time was a big thing under the Bush administration, and it was, it was strategy in the South China Sea and choke points and sea lines of communication. So I loved all that stuff at the time. And so it was kind of an easy decision when it came to enjoying the behavioral aspect as well as the geography aspect, putting those two together. So that was an easy choice for me. And then from there, I went and I took the geographic profiling course at BCIT, which is British Columbia Institute of Technology in Vancouver, Canada. And some people might be familiar. So Kim Rossmo, he's kind of the founding father of geographic profiling in Canada and the US. He's down in the US now. And then over in the UK, you have David Cantor. So his company, ECRI, they run a certification. It's a private certification. It's not official by any means. And it's a geographic profiling analyst certification. And there's only one academic institute they offer it from, and that's BCIT in Canada, because he was from that area. So I went and I took that there along with a bunch of different courses in crime analysis and victimology and so forth. And then from there, I just continued taking small courses here and there and kind of perfected my trade. So that's my academic journey. My personal journey is, and this is one I kind of alluded to on X the other day, and I don't think I'll get emotional here, but we'll see. So my dad's brother, so my uncle, when I was really young, he had a wife and he had 2 kids, my 2 cousins. And when I was really young, he went, we just stopped seeing them. We'll put it that. We just stopped seeing them. We weren't explained much because I was probably whatever, 6, 7 years old. And we stopped visiting them. And we never really saw them for, I would say, not much in 15 to 20 years. So it must have been between 15 and 20 years. And during that time, my grandparents, I mean, they had retired and they were traveling down to Florida, down to Texas, snowbirds in the winter, taking their trailer down there, camping. They had friends down there. I thought nothing of it. But what they were really doing is going down there every winter and posting up flyers and handing out flyers all over southern US because they were tracking their son. So they were trying to find my uncle. And I didn't know any of this until I was late 20s. I had no idea. So that was their whole motivation of becoming snowbirds, and that's why they were switching locations. So they were trying to find their son. And one day they got a phone call, and he was found. It was either Texas or Florida, and he was. Obviously they haven't shared much. It's a pretty emotional subject, and they're both gone now. But and he was found in a hotel, I believe, and he had taken his own life. But he had schizophrenia. So that's what kind of started the whole why he left his family and left. He had schizophrenic episodes. And so that was a whole tough situation in the family. And that was kind of my personal journey into geographic profiling. And then it continued when I went out west in 2013 to take the courses at BCIT. And, I don't really believe in fate, but for those that do, maybe it was fate that I went out there at that time, because as soon as I got there in 2013, my cousin, so I had the 2 cousins, one female, one male, but my male cousin, he was admitted the day before I got there to the psychiatric ward in North Vancouver because he had 2 schizophrenic episodes. He was 2 catatonic states. So he had the I apologize for the terminology here. So he had an excitatory state and then the depressive state. I can't remember the official names for each. He had one of each. But then when he had the one, he was running through town. He was delusional. He thought people were chasing him. He ran into the police station. So then he was admitted. And that happened just before I got down there. So I went and saw him in the psychiatric ward. I spoke with him. And eventually he got a day pass. He got a release. And he showed up. He came back to the house because he was allowed to stay overnight, I believe, just for a weekend. Anyway, he came back and I was staying with them. That's what I was down there at school. They let me stay with them. So he was in his room and he kind of just locked himself in his room and he was reading the Bible all night long. And just all the red flags started going off for me. And we took him back the next day to the psychiatric ward. And later that day, I think it was the same day, maybe the next day, I can't remember. He left the psychiatric ward and it was a lockdown facility. So in these facilities, you're not supposed to be able to walk out, obviously. But what he did is he went down the service elevator, and the service elevator, to keep the place protected, it only goes down and out. It doesn't let people come in without a card. So once he got down and out, he couldn't get back in even if he wanted to. And then after that happened, I showed up there and I had already started my training in geographic profiling. And, right away I went and said, where are you looking for him? And they told me, they're like, well, we're searching the grounds. We have police searching the grounds. We have our staff searching the grounds. And I said, does he have access to the roof here? And they said, no, he cannot get up to the roof. I said, he's not on these grounds. I said, he doesn't have a firearm. I said, he's probably looking. I said, you've got to search the train tracks and you have to search the bridges. And they said, well, we're looking after it. We'll let you know when we find something. And the RC, I think it was the RCMP or the North Van Police or the local police, I can't remember, that we had a meeting with. And they said they were looking into it. So we had to sit back. Anyway, they found him the next day. He had jumped off a bridge into a train, an oncoming train. He had had another schizophrenic episode. So that whole family situation, mental health tied in there, was kind of my personal journey into geographic profiling. And so it just, between the mental health, the missing persons, suicide, everything, working with families. And that's why I do all the work with families pro bono, because I know what my family went through. That's what got me to where I am today. So that's the long-winded answer.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And I didn't know that story, or I wouldn't have asked you to get that deep into it.
I made it through it.
But, well, we appreciate that. If you're just catching us live right now, we're 36 minutes into the show, 154 people are watching. Just please remember to like and subscribe. And we're talking to Geographical Profiler Douglas MacGregor. Doug, there's another question over here. Wishing B says or asks, do you take the generations into account with geography? For instance, my generation loved driving and the youngest generation don't get their licenses until they're at their mid-20s. So does that play a role into it, like generational things?
Definitely. And even more so when I look at cold or historic cases, you always have to take those things into consideration. And, and many people don't when they look at those cases. But, aside from taking in to account like infrastructure and geography, when I look at those cases, I'm also taking into account those sorts of things. But also, looking at current cases, you definitely have to take those into account. Is a person over 60 going to be using their phone as much as somebody in their 20s? Absolutely, generally not. So absolutely, you're looking at the generational differences.
Right. And for instance, like I think you kind of just touched on it, older generations like myself and yourself, right? We relied a hell of a lot less on these electronic devices than the kids today do. I mean, social media and all these other things. I mean, these kids and these 20-year-olds, everything is posting on Instagram and doing all these things. And if that stops, right, major red flag, because that's something that investigators need to act upon quickly, because that generally means a bad sign that you're dealing with that.
Oh, someone said here, I thought this was Colonel Douglas MacGregor. I've gotten that before, and I've been trolled as Colonel Douglas MacGregor. So,
yeah, not Colonel Douglas MacGregor. Well, I get trolled from the because my name is synonymous with the mafia up in Detroit.
Oh yeah,
and Joseph. Yeah, the son of the father of the mob up there, was the last guy seen with Jimmy Hoffa. So when that Netflix show dropped with the Irishman, oh my God, I got so many freaking inquiries going on from the media on that.
That's so funny. Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I had 2 invites to very big shows to talk about it, and I seriously consider going on and talking about it. If you don't do your due diligence and know who you're inviting on, then why not?
Well, mistakes happen, right? Yeah. So Tev has a question, says, do you think that people are less likely to hitchhike these days? It was big in the 70s.
Yeah, for sure. I think it depends on your situation. I think the leisure aspect of hitchhiking is, and in the general population, is a lot lower, at least from what I see and the numbers I see. But again, it depends on the situation, because I still see, like up in Canada there's an example, the indigenous populations, a lot of those people, to get out of their situation, they hitchhike out because they have no other means to escape. They don't have money, they don't have vehicles, so they'll hitchhike out, and that hasn't gone down. So it really depends on your situation, but just in general, I think it's dropped quite a bit.
And look like you have another fellow Canadian here. YYC Chicky says, Douglas, do you ever do talks in YYC? I don't know what that is. I'm hoping it's okay. Would you like to attend? So interested in what you do. Thank you for your share.
YYC. I don't know. You're gonna have to explain that one. What's YYC?
Okay, so what?
Is
So
it
if you could just let us know
city
that
code?
in the chat, what that is, and we'll try to get an answer for you. So Lupo Nini says, "I love the Irishman." Yeah, that's
Calgary?
that's
Okay, yeah.
Calgary.
In Ottawa, we're YOW, so that's why I figured it was a city code. I haven't done a talk in Calgary, nope, but I'm always open to doing that.
Oh, there you go. So someone had asked about in the chat too. I lost the comment, but they said about the spatial orientation with Rex Sherman. We are going to talk a little bit about LISK. There's a couple other profiles and maps that Doug has put together for us. So we're gonna show those in a second. I just have another question for you. Linkage analysis. All right. This is like putting all the jigsaw pieces together, right? And that's basically is what this kind of sums this up, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I mean that's what VICAP is, right? It's linkage analysis system, and that's what it's called in Canada, VICLAS, violent crime linkage analysis system. And it's just taking those different aspects of a crime and basically, in its easiest sense, just think about it as you're plotting them all in an Excel spreadsheet, and then you're seeing which crimes have the most linkages, right? So that's just kind of in its easiest way to understand, and that's what you're doing, and you're trying to figure out which crimes may be connected based on that. Now, I think that I have to shut that off. Is that making noise, Joe? Can you hear that in the background?
No, I don't hear it.
Okay. So you're trying to figure out which crimes are connected. The thing you got to be careful of is not ruling out any connected crimes based on, an MO or a signature is different. And I hear people say all the time that, signature doesn't change. Well, it can, and it does, and it may be subtle, right? It may not be a big change. It may be a different trophy. It may be, Richard Ramirez, one of his victims, he took the eyes out of one of his victims, and they didn't think that was his case because it was just completely different. So that kind of thing can change too. So, but it is very important to get these things. And, this is what I do when I'm looking at different crimes. I'm seeing between the space, time, geography, environment, all these different things, which things are similar that I can start to connect cases.
Gotcha. So you had sent me several. We have about 17 minutes left, so I want to get through some of these profiles that you sent me. Which one would you like to start off with?
Anyone you like. Just throw one up. And this is just to give people an example. And, most of these are serial crimes. People generally relate geographic profiling to serial crime. And there's a reason for that. It's because it sells software, but geographic profiling can be related to any crime. But most of these are serial, just so I can, because they're better as a visual.
So I'm going to take us both off. This is Bondi, so that I can see it on the whole screen.
Yeah, no, this one here is this is Stockton.
Oh, Stockton. So, I'm sorry.
This is the Stockton serial killer from a couple of years ago, Wesley Brownlee. So in this picture here, just something simple. And, I do a lot of my stuff on Google Earth. I use other GIS applications as well. But most of these are Google Earth here. So here you see 4 yellow polygons. And I'm just going to give some examples of what I do before we get into LISK. Each of those yellow polygons is a cluster. Okay. So if there's a cluster in a crime, there's a reason there's a cluster. A cluster is never random. Random is random. Clusters are not random. And we see that in LISK too. So here in these clusters, you have clusters of red pins, which are your killings, and then you have other pins as well. Each of those red pins is an attack. Okay. Each of the yellow pins is where a relative of Wesley Brownlee was living or did live, and each green pin is where Wesley Brownlee either was living or had lived. So you can see that he was attacking in areas he knew. So as this case was going on, I tried to get in touch, but I posted the profile online. I said, you have to look within whatever I said, 400 yards of these attacks. These are clusters, and each one of these is related. So who has connections in every single one of these clusters? So there's an example there. And you can also see the pink line is the rail line, right? And he was attacking homeless people who lived along the rail line. And that rail line goes through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the attacks. So you can start to use geography and use infrastructure there to your advantage to see what this person's doing.
Right. So that was, basically coming in. Was he coming in by the train?
No, he was either walking or driving around Stockton. Yeah, he lived in the Stockton area, but he was using the rail lines because homeless camps, homeless people were camping out along those lines.
Gotcha. So we're going to share another one. Let's make sure I get the right name of this one. All right. So
I might not have named them. So.
Oh, you did. This was the Bondi one, correct?
Exactly. Okay. So this is So this is the Bondi Beach area in Australia. Okay. So this is the Bondi Beast. He raped or sexually assaulted, I believe it was 26 women. He's been caught now. But once you start looking at the areas, and if you use geographic profiling software, it's going to throw a heat map up there and tell you based on it's algorithms where they think they live, but you really got to know the details of the case rather than just relying on an algorithm. So there's a few clusters here. Each one of those white clusters, he formerly worked in each one of those areas. And then there's the green cluster, which is a park he frequented. And then the rest were along the beach and cemetery, which is where he frequented for leisure as well. So he was going to places he knew. And this goes back into offenders. We know where we go and we go where we know, right? So this goes back to that. And here you can see the circle theory for geographic profiling, which is your big yellow circle. It attaches the two furthest points and it kind of narrows down where the person likely lives. And then the updated version of that is the convex hull, which is your red polygon, and it's even more specific. So I use both when I apply when I do my profiling.
Okay, let's pull up another one. We'll stop that one and we'll share a new one. Okay.
If we're running short on time, don't be afraid to go straight to LISK.
Okay. No, we could do this and then we're going to go into the LISK. So this is Cavalcante.
Sure. So this is an example of, using geographic profiling, not for a serial case. Okay. So this was back last year when Danilo Cavalcante escaped from the prison in Pennsylvania, and he was missing. He was on the run for 15 days. He's essentially a missing persons. So you can apply the same types of concepts. I didn't work this case in any capacity. I knew things ahead of time, which I tried to get out there, but I got to be very careful. When it comes to a case like the Stockton case, I can put out something on social media. Hopefully law enforcement will see it because it's after the fact. He's already murdered these people. Let's try and get him before he gets somebody else. In the case like Cavalcante, I couldn't put it out because now maybe law enforcement knew the same things I did, and now he's going to change his behavior and go somewhere else because maybe he's also watching social media, which we obviously know through Rex Heuermann that a lot of them do. So in this specific case, on day 10, he stole a van or truck from a dairy barn. And then on day 11, he ditched that van up in the top left the hand corner there, the van vehicle dump site, 365 Nantmeal Road. So on day 4, I believe it was, I did a geographic profile of him and I located that property because it was the property owned by. When you do a profile, you got to think of, and especially of a fugitive, who do they trust? Well, there was 2 people that tried to help him escape when he murdered his girlfriend, which is why he was in prison. And they actually got off scot-free under the pretense that they gave him up, which they did. And so they got off all their charges. But who's he going to trust? Well, he's going to trust those people. So I profiled those people and I found a property of one owned by his father that nobody was living at, rurally, not far away. And I put that on a map. Now, I didn't know the vehicle was going to end up there, but it was rural, it was quiet, and it was a place to get out of the city. So when the vehicle ended up there, the reason I knew that nobody in the media knew is because nobody in the media, social media, anywhere identified that property. It was just in a field behind a house near a church, near a Methodist church, I think. That's all it was. And nowhere did they identify who owned the property. I tried to put out there on social media, just, I tagged the law enforcement and, do you know why this vehicle is here? But anyway, they did their own thing. They did a great job. I don't want to take away from them. They had 500 officers. They caught the guy. They did fantastic. I don't want to take it away from them, but it is important to show that geographic profiling can help in these kinds of cases, regardless. And maybe they knew what I knew. I have no idea.
It's actually interesting. All right, so the last case we're going to get into is LISK. So I'm going to make it bigger for everybody to see. So that's Long Island, folks.
Perfect. Yeah. So I put out a LISK, a brief LISK profile back in, I think it was 2019 January or something like that. Some things I got correct on it, some things I didn't. That just goes along with any investigative trade. But this is more or less what I put on, and then I've updated it with more frequent information that's come out. What I did put on was I said, in that blue polygon is where he's likely going to live. I said he probably travels into the city, into Manhattan for work, and that whole Brooklyn, Queens, Jamaica area is going to be a buffer of some sort. And I've been doing it long enough that that wasn't very hard, and I can get into, I don't think we have enough time today, but I can get into why I made those predictions, those deductions.
No, you can, go ahead. You can get into those.
We got time? Okay.
Yeah, we got about 8.5 minutes.
Right. So why the blue polygon? Well, all his activity was below the 495, right? So, and there's not many houses above the 495, but all his activity is below the 495, and major highways generally act as kind of a barrier, a mental barrier to people, just like bridges are a mental barrier, rivers are a mental barrier. Like I live right close to the river, and I'm on this side of the river 95% of my life, for example. So these are all mental barriers, but all his activity was below the 495. So I said he likely lives below that. Not much of the activity is in that whole Queens, Brooklyn, Jamaica area. So I said it's probably a buffer zone. It is possible that he does live there. In the end, it ended up being not where he lived, but a transit route. And transit routes present themselves as buffer zones because we just travel through them, right? We don't spend a lot of time in them. I don't know Rex Heuermann's whole life. Maybe he had activities in there, but that information that I know, he basically just looks like he traveled through there. So it kind of is a buffer zone that he's not familiar with. It's not an area he's familiar with. I knew he was familiar with the Gilgo Beach area, that all the beaches there. He's familiar with the whole beach line, probably from when he was growing up, throughout his whole life, leisure activities, whatnot. And I think I said in that initial profile, he'd live within, I think, what I put, 10 to 30 miles from that location, which is pretty close. I think depending on the driving route you take, it's anywhere from between like 18 and 23 miles driving or something like that. The routes, and everything now is starting to kind of fall in place when you look at this individual, where Taylor and Mac were found. And sorry I don't say their whole name, I'm just kind of trying to move along here. Where they were found, and BDS stands for body deposition site, and that's right where he had the gun club, right? So there's an anchor point. He's leaving these bodies in an area that he knows. He's traveling to an area he knows. Same with Castilla. And now I really tried hard to dig for Castilla, and I found a news article. There's probably more than one, but I found one that said the woman he was with before 93, so it would have been Elizabeth Ryan, I guess, had a property up there, or was associated with a property there. Now I did a lot of digging, I couldn't find the property, but that's okay. But it just shows that a news outlet found an anchor point for him in that area, which explains why Castilla's deposition site is up there, and then everything else just makes sense. Where which Lake Hempstead, like, is it Lake Hempstead?
Hempstead Lake State Park.
Right.
Beaches.
Right. So there's two properties directly next door that are under the name of Fuhrman's now ex-wife, right? And they're right beside there. So, did he travel over and just leave the body there because he knew the area, or were his activities carried out at one of those two properties at that time because the properties are under her name during that time, and left the bodies close by? Or if he's only been, I know there was a couple other bodies found there, but I think he's only been looked at for the one.
Yeah, he hasn't been charged with the Peaches case, though.
No, you're right. He hasn't. But if he is, he's got an anchor point there. So it's a reason to look at him for those crimes there.
Right. And the 495, for those that might be looking, that's the Long Island Expressway. That's the main thoroughfare that runs from the north part of it. And Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack's body was found just north of that. I mean, literally just north. You could see the LIE from where they were discovered.
Mm-hmm. And, if you look at the sites, this guy wasn't complicated. He wasn't even that smart. He got away with it because he blended in. That's what he got away with. He got away because he blended in. He wasn't a smart criminal. If you look at his planning document, everything he left out, I mean, I could go on for days. I mean, what he could have done or could have looked at, just little things that he didn't pay attention to. He was not a smart criminal. And it looks like he did his research too. So he was able to get through by blending in. I mean, a lot of criminals do this. Gary Ridgway just blended into the population, right? But when you're looking at this case, and I don't know what the LISK task force is looking at, they seem pretty organized and like they know what they're doing. But when I'm looking at this case, I don't think you can look at this case on its own. I think you have to look at the Joel Rifkin case, and who's the other one I had? Robert Schulman. And Robert Schulman, Joel Rifkin, and Rex Heuermann all lived within a few miles of one another. All their houses are within a few miles of one another. So that just that whole area, you can't look at one case independently because you kind of got to go through your linkage analysis and decide, hey, could this be a Joel Rifkin case? Could this be a Schulman case? It's tough to say. Maybe there's others, right? But
there is another, John Bitroff, right? So yep. I mean, he wasn't labeled a serial killer because he was convicted of 2, but he was thought to have been responsible for Sandra Castillo's case, and it finds out that it's not, right? But technically, you had 4 of these guys operating on Long Island at the same time in 1993, which is kind of amazing when you think about that. But there's just so much more I think we're going to find out about this. But going back to how we started off the show with the routine activities theory, one of those main points, absent a capable guardian, right? The Suffolk County Police Department was an absolute mess, right? Between James Burke getting arrested, Thomas Spoda, the DA, getting arrested, going to federal prison. I mean, all of these things, right? So if you have a police department that's dysfunctional, boy, oh boy, you kind of, wrap it right out there. You already had the motivated offender and the suitable targets, and then you ended up with that. So I think we can tie that together with that, so to speak. Last, any other further comments about either LISK or about the geographic profiling tonight, Doug?
I was just looking at some articles today, and they were saying, some discussions and from your show this past week, and were his crimes committed at his residence? It's tough to say. This guy, he was looking for 3 things in his victims, in his victim selection. He was looking for the availability, the vulnerability, and the suitability, and that's what he found in his victims. And I think there's going to be, I'm not sure if he committed these crimes at a location. That is, I don't know. I was trying even to find out where he was bear hunting. there's bears on Long Island. Was it Long Island? Does he have a place he goes to bear hunt? I have no idea.
Oh, I don't think I've ever seen or heard of a bear on Long Island, but so we have one quick
Apparently there
question.
are. But
one quick question for you.
Go ahead.
It says, can geographical profiling be used in LISK to narrow down other newer or older, I guess, cases or search sites for more bodies?
Definitely.
Is that something?
Yeah, for sure. I'm working on a couple cases like that, no body homicides or serial cases where they have, 3 victims that, and if I get the right information, I can narrow down areas to search. And then, once I do a lot of cases like that. And once I narrow down an area to search, then it's up to, then you send in the HRD teams, and you send in the different technology, whether it's LiDAR or whether it's ground penetrating radar, that kind of thing, and just boots on the ground, to walk the area. But I can cases.
Very good, Doug. Listen, I want to thank you for your time tonight. Hopefully you will come back because this was very interesting. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone listened because there's going to be a bunch of quiz questions coming out on the community tab. If you're not taking those quizzes, head over to the community tag and take a look. Doug, you hang out 1 second. Everybody, enjoy the weekend. If you have time tomorrow, Saturday, 1 p.m., we have Josh Zeman coming back on. We're going to talk about the year anniversary. You guys have a great night. We'll talk to you soon. Bye now.